Much everybody for joining us today. I'm Leanne Jarocki. I work at SaskPower in the public engagement team, and I'm also a new board member of Women in Mining, Women in Nuclear, the Saskatchewan chapter. And the reason I was interested in becoming more involved with WIN Saskatchewan is because of the work that we're doing at SaskPower. Nanette's going to talk about this in a few minutes, but we're looking at a range of power supply options to help the company reduce emissions from the power grid. And that includes things like hydro. I don't want to scoop Nanette's presentation, but that includes things like hydro from Manitoba. That includes for the short term natural gas. And longer term, it includes small modular reactors, nuclear power from small modular reactors. So it's been interesting getting to know some of the women in the mining industry and in the nuclear industry. Just through WIN, and you're probably going to start to hear a little bit more about our work on SMRs as we go forward. So the reason Nanette is here today is because it's really important that as we start to talk about nuclear power, there's some context for that. Like, what are all the options we're looking at? Why would we even look at nuclear power? What's the history of that work, and what are we doing kind of going forward? So I'll touch a little bit on the engagement program that we're starting to run a little bit later on in the presentation. We've included a little bit of that here. And if you stay with us through the whole presentation, we have 4 gift certificates, prepaid Visa cards that we're going to, anybody that did wear their ugly Christmas sweater, will get you to turn your video on. And maybe, I don't know if we can do a draw, but maybe just, type your name in the chat and we'll draw that way. And we hope you use those gift certificates or the Visa cards to support a local business. So I'm going to introduce Nanette now. I think everybody saw her picture on the advertisement where she was standing on the top of a wind turbine. So Nanette is the manager of generation planning at SaskPower. It's her and her team, and there's a lot of others at SaskPower that do this work as well, but they're looking at all of the different ways that we could bring power onto the system that would also help us reduce emissions. So I'm not gonna, I'll just introduce Nanette and let her take it from here. If you guys have any questions, please throw them in the chat. I'll do my best to monitor the chat. We'll save time for conversation afterwards. But I'll do my best to also monitor the chat. If anything comes up that's pertinent, we can ask it at the time. Other than that, I would say I'm going to turn my video off while you're talking, Nanette, and over to you to go on with the presentation. Thanks.
Thanks, Leanne. If you remember, you were going to do the first 2 slides.
Sorry, yeah. Yes, okay. So I said I was going to talk about our engagement program a little bit later, and I will do that. But I do want to say, give a big shout out to our executive, including Mike, our president, who has wholeheartedly embraced and endorsed that program, recognizing the value and the critical path to building energy projects in Saskatchewan of Indigenous and public engagement. So some of the work has started and it'll be ramping up. Can you go to the next slide, Nanette? I don't think I have control of there. So this is just a little bit of an outline. Sorry, I was supposed to set Nanette up for success here. So we're going to talk a little bit about, what's driving the changes in the electricity industry, including SaskPower, some of the options we're looking at to get to cleaner power mix, I guess. Some of the work on the grid side that has to be done to enable those options. So it's not just about the generation, but it all has to fit together with the power lines and stations. And then the key part of our engagement program, which is all of the different planning considerations, the way that we're planning at SaskPower, the things we're considering, and what's important to you as customers and stakeholders of SaskPower and living in Saskatchewan, and then an opportunity for questions and anything that you wanted to discuss. We'll hopefully have time for that. So now it's over to you, Nanette.
Thanks, Leanne. Sorry about my video not working. We had it working earlier and now it's just gone off, but I'm glad you can all see my presentation. So before we start talking about where we're going in the future, I'd like to start looking at where we are right now. And this chart shows you where our power comes from today. So you can see on the graph that we get 45% of our power from natural gas, 29% from conventional coal, 18% from hydro, 5% from wind, and 3% comes from other sources, which includes our coal facility that has carbon capture and sequestration, as well as from independent power producers. What really stands out for me when I look at this graph is that we currently get almost 75% of our power from fossil fuels. And that's going to be changing because the world is looking to reduce emissions. So this is interesting because SaskPower celebrated their 90th anniversary as the province's primary electricity provider last year. That means it took 90 years to build the current power system. It's a conventional power system, it's large and centralized, and now we're planning significant change. What was built up over 90 years is going to have to transform. And a lot of that transformation is going to happen in the next 10 years. So let's look at the drivers for that transformation, starting with federal regulations. We are federally mandated to phase out conventional coal by 2030. And recently, the federal government has also announced that projected carbon tax in 2030 will rise from $50 per ton of greenhouse gas emissions to $170 per ton. They also have a goal to have net zero emissions by 2050. So these recent changes are causing us to rethink our earlier plans. We might not add as much natural gas-fired generation, for example, as we had planned. In 2015, we announced that we'd reduce greenhouse gas emissions 40% below 2005 levels by 2030. And we're on track to meet that goal and likely even exceed that goal. But the way we reach that goal, the power sources we use to replace conventional coal might look a bit different. So the key takeaway here is that we need to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions while still providing reliable, cost-effective power for our customers. Another reason we need to transform is that our customers are changing the way they use electricity and the way they think about electricity. Many people want to be more environmentally responsible and sustainable. Some people are interested in producing their own power through net metering with small-scale wind and solar, for example. And a third driver is the move to electrification of transportation and other sectors of the economy, including industry and agriculture. Those sectors will also need to look to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, and they will need a low emissions power grid to help support their transformation. So what are we doing about this? Well, we are reducing emissions significantly. To do that, my team and others at SaskPower are evaluating a range of low or zero emissions power sources. We're also working on grid modernization. This will allow for a two-way energy system and enable SaskPower to become a platform to move energy for those customers that choose to self-generate. We're putting the emphasis on meeting the changing needs of our customers. And all this work aligns with our focus as a sustainable electricity company. Last year, we achieved this designation established by the Canadian Electricity Association. We're committed to be an environmentally, socially, and financially responsible company with a governance framework that identifies the principles of sustainable development. We were also certified by the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business at the gold level in progressive Aboriginal relations. So we're working hard to maintain those high standards. Here's a look at our long-term targets and objectives. As I mentioned, in 2015, we set a goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 40% from 2005 levels by 2030. So you can see on the graph in 2030, if you take your eyes up to the blue line, that we are on track to meet that target. But going forward, beyond 2030, we anticipate needing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions much further. And again, as I mentioned, the federal government now has a goal to have net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And they also plan to set 5-year targets. So you can imagine a step down from that blue line every 5 years towards 2050. And we have to start to plan around that. we need to determine the best way to reduce emissions without affecting rates for our customers more than necessary. So for the rest of the presentation, we'll talk about the various options we're evaluating to achieve these goals. We look at any source that makes sense for Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan has the benefit of having a wide range of options. Traditionally, we've had a great abundance of coal and natural gas. We have a very good hydro resource, especially in northern Saskatchewan. We've been able to import power and renewable power from Manitoba as far as hydro generation goes. And in the last 20 years, we've been adding significant wind. Now we're moving on to things such as solar as well. The challenge is to find the best options to transition to as options such as coal are removed. So we continue to develop many of our standard options, while we're also looking to emerging supply options in the future, such as energy storage and small modular reactors. As we develop our supply plan, we need to make sure that we have the right mix of generation to provide power to our customers when they need it, while ensuring we meet our greenhouse gas emissions targets and comply with federal regulations and provincial regulations, and still keep rates as cost effective as possible. So we're working to balance all of these things. And of course, there's a large role for renewables to help us achieve that as we move forward. This slide gives you a look at some of the additions we're planning in the near term for renewable or carbon neutral sources. Wind is becoming one of our lowest cost options. And you can see that we plan to triple our amount of wind. I think this is the 685 megawatts shown there is expected to be online by 2023. So currently we have 240 megawatts and we expect to triple that in a few short years. We're also looking to large scale solar for the first time. Utility scale solar we haven't had on our system to this point. So we had a target of 60 megawatts of utility scale solar and we're on track to exceed that. We can import further hydropower as a renewable option. And flare gas is shown on the screen. It's not a renewable resource, of course, but it is making use of energy that would be otherwise wasted. And that's being added through the Power Generation Partner Program, which is a program where you can apply to sell your power to SaskPower. We've also signed power purchase agreements with groups such as the Meadow Lake Tribal Council, who are building a biomass facility that will produce energy from their sawmill waste, as well as Deep Earth Energy Productions, who are anticipating 5 megawatts of geothermal in the S-band area. So the challenge is that some of these renewables, such as wind and solar, are intermittent. We can't rely on them 100% of the time. So we also need to plan sufficient generation that can back that up. And that brings us to electricity imports. Saskatchewan is actually very loosely interconnected. We're almost an island compared to other jurisdictions. Other jurisdictions have connections to their neighbors that allow them to buy and sell power when they need, and that can really help with the addition of renewables. And that's one of the reasons we're looking to strengthen our power line connections with our neighbors. It can be a viable baseload alternative to natural gas, which can help us support the potential for an emissions-free grid. It could also enable greater energy exports in the future, which could support future additions such as nuclear power from small modular reactors. Of course, this will cost some money, but the federal government has announced some cost-sharing opportunities specifically for encouraging interties, and those opportunities could help us manage the impacts to customer rates. And now we'll talk a little bit about nuclear, which is probably the option this group is the most interested in. SaskPower has been looking at the potential for nuclear power since the early 1970s. But in the past, we were looking at larger units, similar to the ones that are in Ontario, around 700 or 800 megawatts in size. And they're really just too large for our system. Our system has the largest units around 300 megawatts, more recently, just over 350 megawatts. And your system has to be designed to handle the loss of your largest unit. So you can imagine something happening that trips your unit offline. If all that generation isn't available to you, your system has to be able to accommodate it. And also, we have to plan our generation to suit the demand requirements. So in a province such as Saskatchewan, those large units just really didn't make sense. Now, however, people are looking at advancing small modular reactors. So they're smaller, and by definition, they're in the range of 50 to 300 megawatts, which really fits well within Saskatchewan's system. We also hope that they can be built more economically than the larger units. They're modular, which means they're designed to be made in a factory and delivered to sites for assembly, and that can reduce costs and risk to schedule. So as the number of supply options decrease for Saskatchewan, the interest in SMRs grows as a potential non-greenhouse gas emitting option. And that's why Saskatchewan is working with provinces of Ontario, New Brunswick, and now Alberta, as well as the federal government, to evaluate the potential for this option together. So how do SMRs differ from large reactors? Well, we expect we can build them for a lower capital cost and at a more competitive power price than large options, partially because they're smaller, and as I mentioned, they fit better within our system, and partially because they're modular. The construction in modular pieces helps reduce project costs. Smaller also helps with the time it takes to construct will be a lot shorter, which can help with schedule and cost. And it's important to note that they're not just smaller. They're not just mini versions of the larger units that you see in other jurisdictions. They're also advanced in technology. And a lot of these advances include safety features, are designed around improved safety features, such as passive or inherent safety features, including gravity-fed systems, systems that rely on natural circulation, and that don't rely on electrical power or battery backup power, an operator to push a button. They just happen automatically. Also, many SMRs are situated underground, which is also in itself an added safety feature. They're less susceptible to natural disasters or attack, for example. The last two bullets on the screen are really more about benefits, not necessarily differences from large reactors. But nuclear power in general is seen as an emissions-free, a greenhouse gas emissions-free source of electricity. And they could offer a major economic development potential for Canada. So Canada has a nuclear industry that, of course, is interested in leveraging a greater future from SMRs. And Saskatchewan has uranium mines, and we could see some opportunity there as well. And this brings us to planning considerations. Leanne's going to step back in for a minute. Generation planning, of course, is really invested in the considerations that goes into studying our technologies and our options and our sites. We work quite heavily on the technical side, but we work with a lot of internal and external groups. And one of the groups we work closely with is engagement. So I'll let Leanne speak to that.
Yeah, thanks, Nanette. So this is just a little bit of a snapshot of how we're framing out our engagement program with people across Saskatchewan. Right now, we've been focusing on engaging with some of the First Nations in Saskatchewan through First Nations Power Authority, which is an organization that's been set up by the provincial government and SaskPower to help facilitate more Indigenous-owned power projects in Saskatchewan. So they have also been helping us undertake some engagement with nations across Saskatchewan, and we've also been reaching out to the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan as well. And the purpose of this engagement is to find out what First Nations, Indigenous communities, stakeholder organizations, and people like you and me, residents of the province, want to see in the power system going forward. There's a lot of stuff that we need to consider, and all of those considerations need to be balanced, as Nanette said. We need to reduce emissions. How much more? You know, we have some new regulations set by federal government, so that's gonna come at a cost, right? There's regulatory risk, there's rates, obviously, how much you pay on your power bill. So anything we bring onto the system is going to add, or you know, we need to balance the cost of that option that we bring on. So there are a lot of people that we talk with that say, well, just go out and build a whole bunch of wind and solar. And that sounds like a fabulous idea, unless you understand how the power system works and that it's, you know, wind and solar is intermittent, like Nanette was saying. So through our engagement, what we're trying to kind of surface is why wind and solar. Like, what if your goal is to reduce emissions all the way to zero, possibly, will wind and solar help that or hurt that, right? And that we have to add a backup source, right? So the conversations we're having now is all about these things on the slide. And we're learning some really important things from stakeholders, and that, you know, cost is definitely an issue, but it's not the only issue. We also want reliable power, and we want to make sure that it's sustainable in terms of both reliable, both cost, and then that there are opportunities. If you talk with the community of Estevan, for example, they're losing a lot of jobs from oil and gas and from retiring coal. So what is SaskPower looking at there, right? So you talk to people in Prince Albert, and they're not as concerned about that, obviously, because they're removed from the community of Estevan. But the overarching message is it's a provincial power company, and at this point the mandate is to provide reliable, cost-effective power to all customers across the province, and as much as possible take input and feedback and make sure that you know, we're reflecting the considerations of the people that we serve in the system as we plan. So you'll probably hear more about that as we start to ramp up our engagement coming up in 2021, not just with stakeholder organizations, but also through some online tools that we've developed for our website. So you can watch for that. So that's it, Nanette. Thanks.
Thanks, Leanne. So the final critical part of transforming our power system is modernizing the power grid. And right now, we rely on customers really to report outages. Our facilities are old, some of them are old, and they need to be replaced and updated. And as customers look to increase net metering, self-generation, the system has to be able to provide that two-way communication and two-way power flow. So through grid modernization, we'll improve visibility and control of the network, which will improve service reliability. So we'll be able to restore your power faster, and we won't be waiting for you to phone us to let us know that the power's off. It will also enable more customer generation, energy storage, and newer technology advances such as electric vehicle charging stations. And that's really the end of my presentation. I'll just recap here. SaskPower's mission is to provide reliable, sustainable, cost-effective electricity to our customers and the communities we serve. So we've identified 3 priorities to achieve this as we work towards 2030. I mentioned that we have a target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 40% below 2005 levels by 2030. And of course, we'll need to increase renewables to achieve that. We spoke about significant increases from wind, from solar, and looking to build tie lines to help enable further renewable additions. At the same time, we need to modernize our grid, which will support another one of our corporate priorities, which is customer service. So in the group that I work in, generation planning, we are really fortunate to be on the front lines of exploring current and emerging generation options. I really love my job. It's a fascinating place to work. We support the supply decisions that will enable SaskPower to meet our 2030 goals. And we'll be working on the next challenge, which is how do we meet targets that are leading to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. I really want to thank you for inviting Leanne and I to speak with you today. I'm so sad that my camera isn't working. I'll try again here shortly because I did wear my ugly Christmas sweater. I have 2 cute gingerbread men on my shirt.
Aww.
And happy to take any questions now that you may have.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Nanette. That was awesome. So if anybody has questions, just a reminder that you are, I think, all auto muted. So please just remember to unmute yourself, and we'd love to, Nanette would love to answer questions about the presentation. So go for it. Oh, there's one.
So, hi, this is Lisa here. Hi, thank you, Nanette, for the presentation. And that's very good. Sorry, my 3 years old is a background and would like to involve as well. I'm Lisa, and I have been working in the oil and gas industry, and just coming out from the potash industry, and started my own small business on the data analytics and data scientist world. That's the future trend is for data driven. So it's a great presentation, and I think the overall generation is supporting the green initiative. I'm wondering, I know for large organizations like mining industries and then like oil and gas industries, they're already looking at the way of bringing renewable energies, and then like gas, the potash plants are start to have cogens or like have their self-generating powers, which use more of natural gas, or like looking at wind turbine or like a solar panel and stuff like that. My question is more related to as individual residents and small business owners, how can we contribute to the bigger plan?
Oh, that's a great question. Thanks, Lisa. As small business owners, I mean, the first thing everyone should do is look to their own, energy usage. Can everyone reduce and conserve energy more? Even people who are interested in self-generating, including businesses who are interested in self-generating, you get a bigger bang for your buck by reducing your power usage and looking for those energy efficiencies first. And then there are also programs at SaskPower for anyone who's interested, including businesses, in either net metering, which is adding something like solar or wind to your house, and then the energy that's used comes off your power bill. Or there's some programs like the Power Generation Partners program for people who want to sell power back to SaskPower. So those are other options to look into. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Lisa. I'm going to take one from George, who put, I'm on unmute, right? Yeah. Who put a question in the chat. Thanks, George. His question is, are there plans for providing education on nuclear energy and SMRs to dispel some of the fears that people may have because of famous accidents at other nuclear power plants? And George, that's an awesome question, because that's something that our team at SaskPower and also our communications team are working on right now, and something that's going to be desperately needed. But I do want to say one thing. I saw on LinkedIn not very long ago somebody saying something about the introduction of SMRs to Saskatchewan and saying, well, I don't know whose job it's going to be to start talking about it. And I thought, well, I don't think it's one person's job. I think all of us as an industry are going to need to be aligned and collaborate in helping people who may not know much about nuclear power tell that story, right? To really look into, especially like the source that I use is the World Health Organization and the International Association of Atomic Energy. I think I got that right, the IAEA, that, is unbiased third-party information that's been monitoring the nuclear industry for years and years and years and years. So absolutely will SaskPower have a role to play in sharing information about nuclear power and helping people understand the pros and the cons and the limitations of not just nuclear, but every generation option. Yes, but we're gonna need a lot of help. So if you have any ideas, George, I'm Leanne, email them to me at SaskPower or to public consultation. We also have a provincial government who's going to be looking for help as well as we, tell this story together. So very good point, and something that we definitely need to be moving forward on fairly quickly. Nanette, there's one more in the chat from Michael. who says, where are you planning to create industrial sized solar generation, and how large of a site is required? I guess that would depend on the size of the facility. But Nanette, do you want to take a stab at maybe answering that one for Michael?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the question. It does depend on the size of the generation. I know that they were looking for 60 megawatts. I think I'm not so involved with that end of things. It's another group that takes in those smaller solar projects. But I know that there is Oasis Solar. I think it's a partnership with Calasis and Calasis First Nation and Elemental Energy. And that's about 10 megawatts near Regina. And SASKATCHEWAN'S First Nation and the FNPA also have a project near Weyburn. And I think the other one is Foxtail Grove with Kruger Energy, northeast of Regina.
Great.
Size-wise, yeah, we could maybe get back to you on that. See, for 10 megawatts, you know, we needed a quarter section with similar generation, so I think it might be around that, but we can get back to you on that.
Yeah, for sure. Does
so
that
other questions popping up?
Yeah, sorry, Michael, does that answer your question? We're happy to get back to you on the exact footprint. It would need to be, I think, you know, be by megawatt. There's most likely a formula.
Oh, I have a pop-up from a coworker who says 80
Awesome.
acres for 10 megawatts.
There you go. Thank you.
Thanks, Aladdin Crow.
Yeah.
I also see in the chat from Brenda Ottenbright, is there any future consideration for another carbon capture system on one of the larger coal plants?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a great question. We have done some work on carbon capture exploration on the other coal plants. In particular, we support the Knowledge Center, and they have done studies specifically on Shand. It's our newest coal plant, so it's the unit that would be the most feasible for additional carbon capture. So that those considerations are still in the works. Where it sits right now is that it is still quite an expensive option compared to some of our other options. So we'll have to continue to weigh that as we compare it to other options when those decisions are made for future supply. And I'm just scrolling through the chat here.
There's one more here from, I think it was from Catherine, who says, are there any current plans to develop an SMR in Saskatchewan, or are we waiting to see how the project in Ontario plays out? I'm happy to answer that if you can if you want.
Sure. Yeah, you go ahead, Jan.
Yeah, so I'm on the SMR project team at SaskPower, and what we're doing, the project that's in Ontario right now, there's a very small micro reactor being developed by a company called Ultra Safe Nuclear Company, I think, which I think is an awesome name. But we're also partnered with Ontario Power Generation to do exactly that, to kind of watch what we would call some of the first mover projects in Canada. Ontario obviously has a history, a long proven trusted history as a nuclear operator in Canada. 60% of Ontario's power comes from nuclear power. So we are partnering with them in terms of, watching what they're doing and making sure that, the things that are being talked about in the nuclear industry right now in terms of, cost and all of the different things on the project schedule are actually going to come to bear. So we'll be watching those milestones to see if it's going to be feasible for Saskatchewan. At SaskPower, just because of the size of our province and the size of our company, we would need probably some federal funding to support any decision around building an SMR in Saskatchewan, and also, proof of how these things operate on the grid. So Definitely it's in our longer term plans, but one of the pieces of evaluation work that is going to be need to be done is watching what happens in Ontario and New Brunswick. And if I don't answer questions, just ask them again. If I miss anything, please, we've got a little bit of time. Nanette, Helen has asked if, she said she understands that there are limits to how much independently generated power can be sold back to the grid. 2 questions. Is this true? If so, does SaskPower have plans to redesign the grid, which I think gets to your grid modernization stuff. But do you want to take a stab at answering that for Helen?
Sure, I'll take a stab at it, and that's exactly what it is, because yeah, I'm not really involved on the transmission side, but as I understand it, yeah, that's why we're looking at modernizing the grid. So it will help enable that two-way communication and two-way power flow, so that there can be more of that independent generation coming back on. So I guess the answer is yes, we do have plans to redesign the grid, and they're working on it as we speak.
Yeah, for sure.
Any more detailed answer will have to.
Yeah, we'll have to come from our transmission friends. All I can say to kind of supplement that is that, you know, that's going to be a key decision going forward at SaskPower, you know, and where we invest our dollars, right? We need to provide, you know, reliable baseload power. Yet we also have to respond to customer demands for, you know, that producing power themselves and selling it back. So there's going to be some critical decisions that are going to need to be made going forward about how much power we even need to be able to take. So that's also a key part of our consultation. It's a question that comes up all the time. So just helping people understand how it works, and then us understanding what our customers want us to be doing to allow them to accommodate, or to allow them to generate on the system. So I think we've got time for a couple more. Yeah.
Okay. I was going to tackle a question from Alicia Beach.
Yeah, cool.
How is land picked in an area to develop solar? Is it productive agriculture lands, reclaimed contaminated sites? So I haven't been directly involved with solar, but we do a lot of siting within generation planning. We have an engineer who specifically works on siting. And there are a lot of considerations that go into siting for generation. And some of those are, you know, environmental considerations. They look at, are there wetlands in the area? Is there endangered plants, animals? You know, and how is the land used? Is it productive agriculture land? Sometimes that might be even preferred to undisturbed native prairie land. And then there's other considerations. Are you close to, depending on the generation type, you know, are you close to resources? How is the road access? And of course, engagement comes into that. So Leanne could speak to that maybe a bit more. You know, what do people in the area think? Is this a welcome site? Yeah, I'm sure I could do a better answer than that. We have 6 considerations, and I kind of tend to focus on the technical side, but
I can help a bit.
Social, environment. Yeah, go ahead, Helen.
We've got Helen Crow on the call. She's the expert.
Well, I'm not necessarily the expert, but I've been part of the teams that's been reviewing proposals for renewable winds and solar. So it's been going on for a few years. So SaskPower, to make sure that that we are good stewards of native prairie and sensitive environments, we make sure, and when we get RFPs out for proposals to get renewables through SaskPower, is that the proponents are taking considerations to natural environments, and we're very tight on where they can and cannot put their generation on, so that we don't become basically a killer of natural environments. So that's one of them, and is right. when they choose sites, it's also how far are they from the grids to accommodate the grid, and how cost would that the cost that would be for us to connect to that, and all those kind of things. But I mean, our proposals are submitted on MERCS, so anyone can have access, who has access to MERCS can see that, but we're very tight on environmental, minimizing impact to environment and heritage values.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Thanks. Thanks very much, Helene. Appreciate it. I want to touch on George's question because I love it. Is there a way to get carbon tax dollars from provincial federal governments to fund SMR technology research? I wonder, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, George, but I think it's a great idea and we should start lobbying now, I think. But I know the federal government is very supportive of SMR research, but I'm honestly not sure. I don't know enough about the carbon pricing, like where it goes, where the money goes, and what it's going to be used for. I know that's obviously an issue in Saskatchewan, but it's a great idea, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I can answer Michael's question. Great to hear about the MLTC biomass to energy project in Meadow Lake. Are there any other waste to energy opportunities that you're researching or aware of? So yes, other waste to energy opportunities would be flare gas, as I mentioned. They're making good use of that wasted energy. There's also heat recovery off of compressor stations, small projects there. As far as biomass goes, we have done some research in the past through different groups. Currently, we're providing some in-kind collaboration with the University of Saskatchewan on biomass research that they're looking at. Yeah. So
yeah, we've got a waste heat to power project at the landfill in Regina, right? Is that the same? Is that the same kind of thing?
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, good one.
The gas, the methane gas to power project up in the city of Regina at the landfill. And then I guess maybe the last question, and then we can do our draw for the gift certificates. But certainly if you have more questions, Nanette and I are both available to take. Probably Nanette probably answer your questions better than I can. If you want to get in touch with her afterwards, we're happy to answer any questions you have. But there's one here from Catherine Nanette that says, where's the additional 5 megawatts of geothermal for 2021 to 2030 coming from? Where might that come from?
So the 5 megawatts of geothermal is being developed by Deep Earth Energy Productions. They're a group that's working in the Estevan area, and they already have a test well drilled. So they've been announcing recently some good news out of their test well. And then they still have a ways to go to drill their second well that will help, I think you need 2 wells, one to withdraw and one to send in and circulate. So yeah, that will be in the Estevan area from Deep